Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Concordia University's Force-Space. Thanks for joining us for the second part of today's event, Symbiotic Futures. And this is our first panel roundtable under the title Biomaterials. We are running today's event as a live stream both to YouTube and to Zoom. So those of you joining us there, if you have any comments or questions, just pop those into the chat, and our team will do the best to read those out a little bit later on. And those of you here in the space, we'll run a little microphone around if anyone here has any comments or questions. Okay, I'm just going to pass the microphone over to Associate Professor in Design and Computation Arts, Dr. Alice Shari. Alice, over to you.
Thank you, Doug. Welcome. I'd like to welcome the panelists. We have Hayley Wyatt, Milady Hartman, Nicole Kovalyou, Alexandria Eaton, and Frank Ouellet. And together, these participants, artists, designers, develop work using biomaterials, bio-inspired materials, surfaces that ask how can we look at transforming unloved materials into objects of value for our homes and social environments. It's really interesting, this question of value, because it can be approached in many ways. But before we delve into more conceptual question, I'd be really curious if we could have a little bit of context from each of you about your project. What's the inspiration, how it was made? Because biomaterials may remain, I would say, an opaque process for those who don't know how to start or have never done it. I'm curious to hear more about each of your projects and to know more about its medium, its technique, its inspiration, its conceptual path before we delve into conceptual methodological question. So Hayley, do you want to start? Okay.
Hi, I'm Hayley. I made this lamp called Unwoven out of bioplastic and textile waste. My original idea when I wanted to start working with biomaterials, I was like, Alice, I want to do biomaterial and textile waste and bacteria and liquid crystal all together. And Alice was like, okay, just chill, just pick a couple of those things for now, and like the bacteria, you can do that maybe later. But it was kind of funny when I was working with this material, it may not be alive, but it does support life because it got contaminated and it was kind of growing bacteria in it. So I thought that was kind of funny that my original plan kind of ended up happening, just not in the way that I wanted. But yeah, my idea for this project changed many times through like several iterations and just learning to work with the bacteria or the bioplastic using different recipes. And I really wanted to use textile waste because being a fashion designer, I'm very passionate and curious about thinking about different ways we can repurpose offcuts and repurpose this discarded material. And yeah, I think especially with clothing and with textiles, there's not a clear recycling stream or material pathway for them in the waste stream. Like they're still categorized as other in the waste stream. And when we donate our clothing to the thrift store, only 10% of it actually gets resold, and the rest is landfilled or incinerated or sent overseas. So I wanted to think of alternative ways of using this material to repurpose it and restore value. And yeah, I also was thinking about design for disassembly while I was making this. It kind of has these components that kind of look like cells, and I could probably disassemble the whole thing in like 10 minutes and reassemble it into something new. And then at the end of its life, it could also be the metal, there's like metal wire that could be recycled, or the material itself is biodegradable because I only used natural fibers.
And why a lamp?
I really wanted to learn something new, and this class is very experimental and open. At first, I wanted to make fabric to make clothes, and then it was just like an accidental process of noticing how it looks when the light shines through the bioplastic. And then I was like, oh, what if I made a lamp? And I also am very sensitive to light. And So I thought, wouldn't it be nice if there was just more like ambient lighting instead of all this overhead lighting? So I was also just personally interested in making myself an ambient lamp.
Well, thank you. Milady, would you mind expanding on your process and concept and ideas a little bit?
Sure. So my design practice, I come from being a toy designer.
I think you might want to show us your
And
project.
let's see. It's moving somewhere. We'll go the other way. Is it the other way? Okay.
Aha.
And there we go.
Okay.
So what you're seeing here on the screen is a series of gelatins, and the blue that you're seeing is also this cobalt that was actually boiled down, reduced, and then to a concentrated paste. And then eventually it went through a series of processes where it was then diluted and then incorporated into the gelatin glycerin base formula, and then poured into the other portions of the gelatin. And all of the other pieces are different sample iterations of paper-based coatings, which I was pretty much interested in. I used series of cowrie shells in terms of high relief, lavender bulbs, et cetera, and also wood shavings, because the intention was really to, if some of you who know my work, I always talk about legs. So my thinking was to use, to create a shape of a leg with textile and then stuff it with these wood shavings. But due to this experiment, I used paper instead, paper and fiber. And so let's see if we have another image. And so now this is the actual sculpture that you're looking at. So it's a multifunction piece. It's a vase as well as a light. So one of the things when visitors come here to Canada, we're always captivated by this beautiful blue sky, white clouds. And so I wanted to...
Just like now.
Yeah. So I wanted to try to encapsulate that into a vase, and also the anthropomorphic portion of it, which is the human aspect, was really to incorporate the human element and how humans interact with nature. And so the concept of combining humans and nature, whenever we're stressed, whenever life is too much, we have a tendency to go into nature so that it absorbs the negativity and we have a sense of tranquility. So it's really a concept of mental health. And also light, when light is on, you feel a sense of life. And when light is turned off, you sense like something has just gone, evaporated, is gone from the elements. And that's basically it. It's just a combination of human environment, and also just taking a risk with biomaterials, because I had never worked with biomaterials before. So it afforded me to take experiments, do a series of experiments, and see how the material works. And I discovered and took a risk, and I had a great time doing it.
Thank you, Milady. Nicole.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. So for this project, it involved finding a lot of stuff from my house and turning it into ink. Originally, I had no idea what I wanted to do as a project. It was something that was very far out of my comfort zone, so I was more than a little nervous, understandably. And eventually I just started thinking about stuff that I did know about art, and the fact that, well, a long time ago, paint was never usually like sold. Artists had to make it by hand, you know, the process, egg, some sort of pigment, and you used it as a paint. And I thought to myself, well, like we started relying on a lot of art stores, art supply stores to get our stuff. And during the pandemic, me and my mom, we just bought so much art supplies that for the most part, they're kind of catching dust in the basement. So I thought to myself, maybe there's a way to take some of these like materials, not necessarily art store materials, but materials, and turn it into inks that I could use. and potentially show others like that it is also possible to do these things. So it was a long and tedious process, very, very messy. So, and because I was within the confines of my mother's kitchen, she was hovering over me, making sure I didn't make a huge mess. In this image over here, these are chips from crushed charcoal that I had. I had some willow charcoal from like my first year in CEGEP that I bought for a project that I barely really got a chance to use. I had a bunch of sticks, so I crushed them all down. And I also ended up chipping away at some compressed charcoal. I couldn't crush it by hand, so I had to use a nail file in order to turn it to dust in order to put it in my ink. And I used gum arabic as a binder. These are the inks over here. And this over here was berries. So Alice recommended to me referring to this book called Make Ink by Jason Logan, which has a lot of recipes. And originally, while I did intend to go out and potentially forage for some, I still ended up finding a lot of things in my own home that could be used in order to make interesting pigments for ink, which I think is also a really great idea because it gives a new life to these otherwise forgotten materials that you may have bought, who knows, years ago even. So this was used from some week-old blueberries. Some of them were getting a little shriveled up. And it was actually my mother who suggested that I boil them down because she said, and I quote, "a lot of the pigment is found in the peel," which is exactly what happened. So she gave me a hand with this. And I ended up putting some salt and vinegar in it, as well as some clove to help keep it together and enhance the color. The filtering process was a nightmare. Only that much can be said. Because it was very thick and it didn't go through all the way. The more interesting one was probably the first one I made, which was spirulina and alcohol. It was simple. The original recipe called for turmeric, but this was also just as interesting because each of these inks have their own look, texture, feel, and also scent, which is something that I didn't even take into consideration as I was going into this project, but it's also very interesting because a lot of acrylic paints have this chemically smell, but then when you make it yourself, you have these more natural scents that come through. The alcohol was very rough though to smell, but yeah, for the most part, that's the chipping away with a nail file part. It was very tedious, and yeah, there you go.
Thank you, Nicole. Alexandria, a few words about your project.
I have a few process photos. So I really started out thinking about how I could look at the materials I already used in my visual art practice and how I might expand and improve on that. So I decided to look at natural dyeing. I was a little bit intimidated to try the dyeing process, but through a workshop here at school and through the support of the school to use the labs, I was able to really experiment and explore with color. I had often 5 or 6 pots of color going at one time and really tried to look at it as I would my paint palette by mixing and seeing what colors I could achieve through different processes. I'm surprised at how this project has developed. I decided to take the pieces of fabric I worked with, organic cotton, as well as lightweight and heavyweight canvas, which I'll accept the colors differently. There's quite a long, in-depth process of scouring and tannin and mordanting to have the fabric accept the colors. You can use different colored tannins, which affect the end colors as well. And then I work with paint and textiles normally in my visual art practice, so I accumulated all the colored fabrics and stitched them together into a patchwork, kind of a patchwork quilt or a collage, which I see as a way of gathering disparate elements and reconfiguring them, which is sort of a big part of my practice and research. And I've sewn it into a cloak, which I will wear in a performance at some point during my research. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So here are some of her process shots. Okay, so my project was trying to trace contamination from an old sort of waste site, and yeah, just being inspired by what sort of can come out of the soil and then how that is fed into plant life. And so this is just sort of a step one, more of an exploratory project that I started working with biomaterials and natural inks. And so for this step, I mostly focused on sumac, and initially it was based at the Champ de Possible because I knew that there was a lot of work being done there, and it was a place that I'd been many times for other projects as well. So I felt very comfortable there. And so, yeah, so what we see here is just like a detail shot of one of the biomaterials. This one is actually a sumac ink that I made from, there is this underpass in Milan that I knew that there was a lot of sumac there. So I wanted to do a sort of comparative analysis of two different inks with the same plant, but two different sites in the sort of same neighborhood. So yeah, here are the two next to each other. So the one on the left is from the underpass, and they remained pretty reddish once it was distilled. And that sort of surprised me, since that patch of land, a lot of the sumac was was already decaying, and it was very gray and black almost. And compared to the sumac that I found at Champ de Possible, which was pretty much the same color, maybe a little lighter, ended up making more of a yellowish, brownish color. And then, so yeah, so for this first one, I ended up incorporating some leaves and some trash that I found at Champ de Possible as well, just to sort of present that impurity that I'm sort of like working with. And for the other one, I ended up using some milkweed because there was a lot at the champ, and I just loved how fluffy it was, and I thought it would make a nice sort of something to work with. And it wasn't really part of the plan initially, but once I started working with the biomaterials, I decided to incorporate it, and yeah, it looked really nice. And so yeah, that's sort of the crux of it. I have future plans of trying to actually collect different types of papers and waste and sort of shred that up to create my own sort of figments, my own substrates, and then use these inks. Probably in the next, springtime, I'll be able to start. I mean, it might take a while before the plants sort of, rejuvenate and all that. So the cycle will be a sort of slow process, but ideally, I would be able to collect sort of trash and other remnants at the site, and create my own substrates, and then use the inks as another layer to sort of demonstrate sort of images or data that I've been collecting through this work, and then using the biomaterial as more of a top layer that's more of a watermark, or sort of a layer that can sort of transmit an extra sort of message that's not part of the base. So yeah, that's sort of an experimental, in between right now. I'm sort of just exploring yeah, different ways of working with the materials. And yeah, it was very fun. And just, being initiated to the biolab has been great. And yeah, it's been very good.
Well, thanks, everyone. It's actually very interesting to see process picture because we sometimes look at the final, well, it's not even a final object here. All the objects are in progress, but let's say it's the moments that's crystallized in time, but behind it, there's like tons of making, experiment, failure, risk-taking. So it's really great to have access to all this. I think my first question for you as a group is that everyone jumped in a material, a technique, a medium that they didn't know. And they were like, wow, let's experiment and do something. But you all decided to work with living or semi-living material, and it's not like you can decide from A to Z what's going to happen. You try things, and it's like, it worked, it doesn't, like, the recipe looked nice online, but here's what I have. And it's like, there's a kind of management of expectation versus results. And sometimes you have like serendipitous moments of like, whoa, it's amazing. So it's a negotiation of like expectation versus results all the time. So I want to hear you on this question of control versus letting go, on this question of working with living material where you don't control everything from. How does that change from previous project to this project? How will that inform your future work? Or not, it's okay, there's no pressure. So I'm just curious to hear you about this question of control versus the agency of the living, who does a little bit what they want sometimes. Yeah.
So for example, in my case, I am a toy designer, and I was working with categories of toys. So you have push toys, pull toys, and dolls. And out of all of the entire toy category, the most popular and the most efficient are dolls. Why dolls? Because they represent the human form. So you have a head, arms, legs, etc. So as human beings, we identify those body parts as a whole, as a holistic entity. So with this project, what it afforded me was to take risks. So I came into this class thinking I would like to work with silicone and fiberglass and all the bad products that aren't great. So Professor Alice said, milady, there is such a thing called biomaterials. I said, yeah, but I've never worked with it. So I took a chance. I said, you know what? Since I'm being afforded this chance to take a risk, let me just go out and just experiment. So I did just that. I worked with lots of gelatin base, and I said, okay, from film, I worked as a scenic designer. I did landscape paintings. So I said, okay, let me try that because at least I can lay out the material on a flat surface and let me see if I can still take the technique of painting with this biomaterial. For me, it's a challenge. I've never done it. First, I've never worked with the material, and then to apply that technique with some material, foreign material that I've never worked with, that was the challenge. So lo and behold, the great thing about the material is that I had to work with different temperature gauges. So for example, if you go on to the lamp, if you will, once we get to the lamp, you'll be able to see the translucency. So the white clouds, for example, I'll just talk as we look for the image. So as you look at the white clouds, which is really transparent, it's not white. So that was kind of like a thick glob that I had to work with ice cubes to make it thick. So that pretty much created the foundation for the flat surface. So once I was able to create a thick substrate, put that onto the flat surface, then I was able to pour in the cobalt, the cobalt dye into a more of a liquid format, pour it in, let it set. So now I'm able to paint through and create this landscape that you see here, that you see there. And at the very bottom, it's dark, you don't see it now, but again, it's that going back to the environment, going back to waste, going back to soil that we talked about from the very beginning, wood, those natural elements that actually decay. And also when you look at the landscape throughout the seasons, they're constantly changing through color, texture, and it's just, and it's ever changing and ever evolving, if you will. And so working with that material and trying to imitate the environment in which we are living in and the scale of it to something that's much smaller was quite a challenge. But I think that I had a great time doing that, and it was great. And so what you see there was the experiment of working with that material.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear about other perspective, and I have a follow-up question after. Anyone wants to?
Yeah, I think that's a cool question about the control versus like letting the material act or speak, and definitely using this kind of material for the first time. I was like, I have no idea how it's going to behave or how it's going to interact with the different textiles that I'm using. And so sometimes the textile would like soak up all the biomaterial and it was like way too hard. And then other times it was breaking. And then I noticed some with different materials, like I used this pink linen and it ended up turning the biomaterial pink, which was so beautiful, but then sometimes that didn't happen. And yeah, I think that's like a privileged position to be in, to like be able to listen to a material for the first time, and it's really fun. You don't know what's gonna happen. And yeah, so I think it's kind of like, it's fun to have that collaboration, and it's fun to not be totally in control sometimes.
For my case, I had like maybe the slightest idea of how something might happen, but then again, a lot of hiccups would happen along the way. So I knew that when it came to using blueberries, it might be a little thicker than my other inks because the juice might be sticky, and I was worried about how it would flow on paper. And as previously mentioned, the filtering process was a lot. It went through like a sieve first to get rid of all of the bigger chunks, like peel, potential like seeds, anything that didn't go through, and then it was put to filter, and it took a long time. It stood overnight. But I think the hardest one was the charcoal, because and most of it was actually through my own error. I put the charcoal in the water and I put the Arabic gum. I gave it a mix. I let it stay for a while, and my mistake was to put it through a filter. So while the water did come out dark, the pigment didn't show when I put it on paper, or it did, but only a little bit. So that was where I had to bring out the compressed charcoal and chip away at it a little bit and add some in. So there was a lot of there was a learning curve in that aspect of it, which was still really interesting to see where I went wrong. What could I do next time when I try this again, which is definitely something I would love to try again. So yeah.
Thank you. The idea of holding on and letting go is something I think about a lot in my research. Drawing from personal experience in motherhood and the idea of holding on and letting go, I try to take that experience and move it into my visual art practice. And I think when you're able to lose control a little bit and trust your intuition, that's when more exciting things start to happen. And within the context of this class and this semester, I think the freedom that was given to us to say, I want you to experiment. It doesn't have to be a finished project. Explore and discover, to sort of have the time to do that, because I'm someone who puts a lot of pressure on myself to finish things and have results to show. So there's a lot of freedom in that. And then working with materials that are new to you and you don't know what to expect, and really embracing some of the unknowns and the surprises. There were some very exciting moments where it was like, wow, look how pink this is. And then many failed attempts at the same time. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel similar. I feel like the process was pretty simple in a way. Like I was sort of following, certain recipes, or, it wasn't multi-step. It was just you do this, you do that, and then it adds up to this. But it was more the outcome that I wasn't sure exactly what it was going to be, and also once it was applied, how it would interact with the other elements that I was sort of incorporating. And yeah, that's sort of I'm really interested in that sort of material agency, and trying to not control really what the output's going to be. Maybe I have a vision and I'm trying to maybe put a framework that is going to sort of lead the project, but at the same time, I want the inks or the biomaterials or what I'm using to sort of create sort of their own path. And yeah, I think I'm going to still embrace that, but I will shift into I want to move towards more like silk screening and paper making. So again, it depends on the pigment, depends on the waste that I'm going to salvage, like how am I going to put it together, how is it going to interact together, and yeah, sort of just let it, again, there's going to be a lot of iteration involved to get to a desired outcome, but at the same time, I think it's fun to embrace that sort of unpredictability.
Well, thanks for your beautiful answers. It makes me think that we don't value mistakes enough and the documentation of mistakes enough, because this is really helpful to go forward. When you mention okay, it involved a lot of struggles, filtering, and so on, these are the things that we forget as we get more familiar with the material. So I think it's really important to attend to the mistakes and document them also for others, because so they can learn from that bagage that you accumulated, that bagage of knowledge. So I think we should make a habit of documenting mistakes, not as mistakes, but as maybe a journal de bord or journeys. Yeah. So this brings me to another question, and maybe it's more of a provocation that stems from yesterday's discussion. Okay. We always speak about care in design, in science and technology studies, in anthropology, in ethnography, care. We need to care. And there's self-care, so care is everywhere. So I'm just wondering, how would you describe care in your own practice? What does that mean for you? And I slept on that question, And what does that mean for you? And how do we texture the word from a design standpoint, from a design perspective? Because, it's easy to, we think about self-care, neoliberal agenda. So what does it really mean, concretely, in the thick of things, when you're in the studio making things? What does it mean to care?
I'll start. Well, right off the bat, it makes me think that, since I'm working with nature and not just biomaterials, there's the environmental care that, there's a whole protocol that needs to be sort of followed if you want to do it ethically, especially for foraging. So as much as I don't want to pick, fresh flowers and maybe just stuff that's been fallen on the ground, there is, it sort of puts me in a weird spot, because if I can't really use what's around, well, then I can't, it doesn't become part of the process. But also just trying to not create more waste. I'm using waste as the base for my project, but I don't want to create more waste coming out of it. So it's really trying to be as reducing the impact of what I do, but also embracing it, but being an active participant in the sense that I'm not pushing more out,
Mm-hmm. So it's around non-extraction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we did talk yesterday about care in the choice of materials through the process, and then also in the results of the projects. I think in this specific project, being able to use natural materials that I feel more comfortable are kinder to the environment is a very good feeling. My visual art practice is based on personal experience of caregiving. So the result of this project, the fact that it's a wearable art piece, it speaks to grief and how we can share grief collectively, and that comes from being a caregiver for my mother for many years when she had Alzheimer's, and that grief that like was heavy on your body is invisible to everyone around you. So through this practice, I'm trying to make grief more visible so that people talk about it, and people who are experiencing grief. And there are many different kinds of grief, and I feel like maybe we're all experiencing, just watching the news, or, but then there are also very specific kinds. And I feel we don't have necessarily the practices in place to deal with those heavy emotions. So through the result of this practice, hopefully, my intention is that there is more kindness and care towards people that are experiencing long-term grief. That seems like an overarching goal, but ultimately, that's my intention.
Well, in what I'm currently studying, for the most part, it's mostly done through like digital formats and mediums. So this really gave me the time to be a little more hands-on. And I guess the whole point of it was giving a second life to something that you would otherwise neglect. I haven't. This whole project was very different from all the other ones I've had this semester, because it was more hands-on instead of just me sitting at my computer for hours. So it was a really nice change of pace, because I haven't done something like this since like CJEP. So it really gave me a new perspective of like thinking more about like what I use, how I use it, like how often I use it, and just thinking about, I guess, how it can be given a new life in more ways than one. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole.
For me, I'm very much interested in the human condition. My design is really human-centered, so therefore, I'm always incorporating this element of anthropomorphism in my pieces, because ever since COVID, as human beings, we have that innate ability that we want someone to care for us. We would like someone to appreciate us, the environment in which we are surrounded in. We appreciate the concept of a group think and an interaction with other human beings. So my design really focuses on it's human-centered, and also really thinking about the condition of the human being in general. So when I design, I incorporate the element of an organ, which are these series of legs. And it may sound really silly, but when you think about it, if you were to unfortunately lose your legs, life is viewed through a different lens. It affords you mobility, it affords you luxury, it affords you an economic status, it affords you to do so many different things. And also it gives you strength, and it's an empowerment biometric tool that if we're fortunate to have it, it's an asset. So in that sense, when we're thinking about COVID and all these individuals who have just passed away, who have not been able to mourn their loved ones, I was thinking, how does one address care through concern, so I said, okay, as a designer, let me create this series of flowers. Coming from the background of toy design, I said, okay, this is really a difficult topic for adults as well as children. So it started off with a sprout with legs. I said, okay, kind of like we understand the beginnings, the birthing of something that's underground, something that comes to life. It regenerates into a bulb, into a flower, into a larger plant, and so forth. So if we understand something that is underground and we care for something that we cannot see, and finally when it sprouts and we now are forced to care for it because we are now seeing it, it's the tangible, we understand the concept of inanimate objects in relation to human beings and furniture. And so relating the legs to furniture, which represents strength, and also from COVID, how do we then now start the conversation of mental health? How do I care for someone else? How do I express my emotions? And then where do I go? To whom do I speak to? What is the environment like? So I am always thinking about this concept of care. And so just to take it one step further, because I'm a creative individual, I said, why not create these series of legs in terms of empowerment onto furniture where it takes it to another level, another concept. So that concept of care is always in the back of my mind as well as in the forefront. So anyway, that's my spiel on legs and care.
Thank you, milady.
Care in my creative practice is, as everybody said, definitely like thinking about the impact of what I make and what's going to happen at the end of its life cycle. And yeah, what kind of impact, long-term impact am I making when I make this? But for myself, I think care is also about like slowing down. And in this project, it was very, very, very slow because I literally took pieces of fabric and picked them apart thread by thread, like undoing the weave by hand. And all of the sewing that I did was also by hand, so it was very meditative, very slow. Like usually I'm using a sewing machine, but I wasn't doing that this time. So this was one of the slower projects that I've done. I think that we move at like such an unsustainable speed that we are just moving too fast that we like forget to look around us sometimes. So yeah, I think in my practice, care is just slowing down, paying attention.
Thank you so much, Adi. I have another question, but before asking that question, I want to ask, because I see time flies, if there is a question within the public, the audience.
If you're in the audience and you have a question, you can just raise your hand and we'll bring a mic to you. For those online, we welcome your questions as well. So please pop them in the chat, or you can use the virtual hand and we'll call on you.
Any comment, question? Oh, yes, Davey.
I would like to ask all of you guys briefly, because you all worked with biomaterials, is there anything that you saw in each other's process that you maybe would have liked to adopt in your own if you were to continue or to do this again?
I definitely, a lot of people in this group tried like you working with inks and dyes, and that sounds really, really fun and really cool. So that's something that I saw that I would like to be a next step for me in my process.
I particularly, I particularly liked Frank's piece. I think one of the things about it is there's a sense of memory. It's poetic, it's delicate, and I also like the nuance of textures and colors. It's very sophisticated and organic in nature. Even the presentation, if you haven't seen it, I feel like I'm promoting your work, but hey, it's really hot. So I really love the way that you presented your work, and also the way that you really allow the material to just do its own thing, So, and then you framed it, which is a type of control, but not really. So I think that I would gravitate towards your piece in particular. Yeah.
Seeing all the use of like biomaterial and getting to like feel the texture of it, how it sometimes dries or how it sometimes can be flexible, feels like like, it feels like a really interesting medium to explore. I don't know how well the inks that I made would potentially end up being a good way to like dye it, but it does seem incredibly like interesting because there's so many possibilities that you can make with it. Like through this panel alone, there's like so much variety in what everyone made. And it would be a really interesting thing to explore in the future.
I feel like I just scratched the surface of what I'm doing, so I want to really keep diving into using more plants and flowers and leaves. I'm inspired. I want to do all these things. I want to try. I'm really drawn to textile practices, so I really enjoy Haley's and Divya's quilt yesterday. I tried to make inks, and I was not happy with any of my results. My intention was to have a watercolor painting made with my inks, and that didn't turn out.
Yeah, I was, well, thank you for the very nice comments, by the way. Your piece is also beautiful, and likewise for everyone. But yeah, I think biomaterial as a material to use is incredibly flexible, and same, like I've only, scratched the surface. This is sort of just like one type of project that I would sort of like use it for. Like it almost became like more like sculptural somehow, compared to, well, it's still like a flat surface that I ended up sort of putting upright basically. And that's sort of where I'm going with my, next iterations. But instead of having it sort of contain the entire work, I want it to just be more something that's like on the top of it. But the inks though, yes, I will definitely continue working with that. And yeah, it's just really, simple process. Like I feel like anyone can really do it. So it's not like you could do this like in an afternoon at home, and it's really fun. It's true. You can let it, you need, equipment and, and all that stuff, but you can experiment, and you can break the ice pretty fast, and it opens doors. And yeah, I feel like it's not like the knowledge is not like too hidden, there's a lot of resources.
Thank you so much for your answer. Anyone else has a question, a comment? No? Okay, so maybe I'll end with my last question. Question about place. You all embody, all your objects, project, embody questions around space and place, but it's not the same place and space. Some of you are working in situ, directly with the material, foraging the material. Some of you are working with remote problematics that are invisibilized, like the clothing industry, the fashion industry. I mean, like clothing waste never go away. It's just, as Christo mentioned yesterday, you have tons of like mountains of clothing waste and textile waste in Chile or everywhere else in the desert. What do we do with that? It's just that we don't see it. So it's like, it works in those regimes of visibility. And in your case, like the space and the place is very like personal and emotional. You work with, I think, local material, but also with a very localized emotional space. And in your case, Nicole, the question of place is home. So home, and what can you do from home? How does that transform your practice when you think about space and place in relation to your practice? Could you work without a site? Could you work in a site? What's the tension in your practice between site and making and materials?
Well, yes, right now I'm working with a specific site, but I feel like waste can be found anywhere, plant life can be found anywhere, and the contamination is everywhere as well. So it's more, yeah, I could be open to, using this sort of process and grounding it in different areas, and seeing what it reveals, depending on the wildlife, depending on what I incorporate into the art. But yes, I do like working with the site as well, because then you see it change, you see the evolution, and you can adapt as well, and sort of have a more sustained relationship with the place. And yeah, it's less like, being like a vagrant or something, like, you're not just like walking around and finding stuff and that's it. You sort of like try to go back and you document and you really sort of keep this in your, and you create a memory. You really build on that. And yeah, like I said, I could sort of do this anywhere, but right now I've chosen this place and I want to sort of create this sort of connection to that place. Yeah.
And I do work from a very emotional place, which is largely based in my home in Sackville, New Brunswick. I do feel sort of temporarily here. And it reminds me of the panel yesterday, actually the second panel, where I felt like everyone's work really dealt strongly with emotion. And we were talking about archive and how do you create an archive of emotion, or can you? Like, that's something I thought about last night when I got home. So I do think that, yeah, my practice is an emotional space, which I guess can travel with me.
Can your practice exist without you? Present? Yeah.
No.
That's it. It's tied together. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, good.
Yes. That's a great question.
Well, in my case, a lot of the stuff that we did was mainly done in the kitchen. All of it was. And like, while there is not really a necessary need for the kitchen, a lot of big messes are made in kitchens. And so while we were trying to keep it contained, for the most part, that is where a lot of like stuff like that happens, basically. And well, I guess it was also like the fact that I was in my own home was also like interesting because, there were like people there who were checking in on what I was doing, who were giving like input. And it was really great, just, I guess, having that second like part of it there, because in a way, I was getting some interesting like feedback and like suggestions and stuff. So, like there's that whole part of the experience as well. It's like other people like joining in and like, like wanting to, I guess, be a part of that process as well, which was really fun.
Well, in my case, place is very important. I think that as a designer, we have a tendency to consider our studios, our research labs as a personal space, which is a good thing because it allows us to think, to meditate, and really focus on the project at hand. But in my case, oftentimes I like to go do field research in the sense that I want to be able to go where people are hanging out, how people, just to see behavior and see what body linear movement is occurring in a particular space, bring that type of research creation knowledge back to the studio, and then emulate that, and then say, based on the variety of groups of people that I have seen through ages and stages, how do I emulate those types of movements with this new material, this either upcycled, recycled, or biomaterial that I want to use, and is it appropriate for these particular end users? So I think that space is important, where we create, how we create. Without it, it becomes absolute.
So in my practice, my space is just my studio, but yeah, as Alice said, clothing waste literally goes everywhere, except for the places that we can see it. And we really have this like disposability mindset, like out of sight, out of mind. But there's been like a lot of studies where people have put air tags on clothing that they donate, and then it can end up traveling for like months and months to like around the world before it eventually like ends up somewhere. And yeah, as Crystal was saying yesterday, in Chile, there's like literally mountains made from all this textile waste. So the waste that we produce shapes our space and shapes places. So with my piece, I'm kind of thinking about how can we stop sending it to other places and use it instead to shape our own space, but in an inspiring, helpful way. So instead of seeing it as a nuisance that needs to be shuffled away, like how could it support architecture or new objects?
Thank you so much, Amy. It was a beautiful discussion. I really appreciate how each of you kind of develops an ethics of material engagement. It's very different from designer to designer, person to person, but it's a way of working that's site-specific, working with local materials, working in a non-extractive manner in terms of harvesting and foraging, trying to go as close as possible to yourself and your own community and your own space to develop meaningful objects. So there is, I would say, the beginning of a beautiful manifesto that could emerge from this discussion. So I want to thank you. Congratulations for the amazing projects and this amazing contribution. We'll take a short break, 20 minutes, and we'll be back at 2:20.
Thank you, everyone. So, as normal, you can find this conversation. It is already available on our YouTube. And for those of you online, as we said, about 20 minutes, we'll be getting started with our second panel. Thank you.
High five. High five.